good morning here in the United States, and good afternoon for those of you who are joining us from Europe or from Israel. I am Magda Tedder. I'm the Schwidler Chair in Judaic Studies at Fordham University. And on this special day, marking 1 month since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, I am deeply honored to welcome you to our second webinar, Scholars at War, which is organized in partnership with the History Department of the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, the American Academy for Jewish Research, which in the 1930s and 1940s devoted considerable resources to rescuing and supporting scholars affected by the Nazi regime, and the Lviv Center for Urban History. I am particularly grateful to Dr. Irina Klimenko from the Ludwig Maximilian University for all her work and coordination with the Ukrainian scholars affected by current war and making this lecture series, webinar series possible. This series is meant to uplift Ukrainian scholars' voices and offer support with people in war zone and in exile from their home in need for basic supplies. It may not seem too urgent to give attention to scholarship. Nevertheless, society depends also on those who create and preserve knowledge through their scholarship and work at institutions devoted to research and culture. So we, scholars sitting comfortably in our homes in peace, wanted to recognize and support those who are facing the harrowing reality of war. So we're particularly grateful and honored today to our panelists, Artem Kharchenko, Irina Matsevko, and Yuri Radchenko, all of whom are from Kharkiv, one of the most devastated cities in this war. So I'm grateful to you for agreeing to join us in these extremely difficult circumstances. Now I want to turn to Dr. Irina Klimenko, who is a scholar of early modern European history, with particular interest in European entangled history of the East and West, as well as historical theory and the interdisciplinary methods of historical research, who, as I mentioned earlier, has been instrumental in creating this series. So I want to hand over the screen to Irina to introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Magda. Dear colleagues, dear friends, I am honored to introduce our panelists today. And I start with Artem Kharchenko, who is historian and project coordinator at the Kharkiv Center for Interethnic Relation Research in Eastern Europe. Dr. Kharchenko's work focuses on Kharkiv and its history. He has studied Jewish community in the space of Russian imperial city of Kharkiv in the late 19th century and early 20th century. He also has worked on forcible transfers of children in Soviet Ukraine in the 1920s and 1930s. Artem Kharchenko has been involved in numerous international projects devoted to Jewish history and heritage, including the project Jewish Heritage in Belarus and Ukraine, presentation, education, popularization. Artem Kharchenko has also received numerous fellowships, including from the Rothschild Foundation. Thank you, Artem, for being with us today. Our second panelist, Irina Matsevko, is a historian. She is also a deputy vice chancellor of the Kharkiv School of Architecture. Between 2013 and 2019, she was the deputy director of the Center for Urban History in Lviv. Dr. Matsevko's research interests lie in urban history and heritage, with focus on inclusive approaches and studying and preserving cultural heritage practices, and sustainable cities and communities. Irina, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Our third panelist, Yuri Radchenko, is also a historian. He is the co-founder and the director of the Center for Interethnic Relation Research in Eastern Europe in Kharkiv. His PhD dissertation was on Nazi genocide of the Ukrainian Jews in the military administrated area from 1941 to 1943. Yuri is also a research fellow at Yahad in UNU, an organization founded to locate the sites of mass graves of Jewish victims of the Nazi mobile killing units, especially the Einsatzgruppen in Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Romania, and Moldova. Yuri Radchenko's areas of studies are history of the Holocaust, Ukrainian Jewish relations, collaboration in Eastern Europe, history of right radical movements in Europe in 1920s to 1940s. Thank you, Yuri, very much for being with us today. We are truly honored to have you.
I am also a rabbinical student at Machon Shechter in Jerusalem as well.
So again, thank you so much for joining us, especially meaningfully on this day that marks the month since the invasion. So we wonder whether, before we get started to discuss more specific questions, whether you could tell us about your professional position and work life and research before a month ago, before February 24th. What were your institutions doing? What were you doing? How were you grounded before the world collapsed because of the Russian invasion? Shall we start? Irina, why don't you start?
So Irina already presented me. So as I'm Lvivian originally. I'm from Lviv, and I moved to Kharkiv a few years ago. My interest for last few years, it's specifically heritage and heritage practices, and also inclusive approaches in research, and especially in presenting complex and complicated heritage of Ukrainian cities, which were former multicultural cities, and also big challenges with Soviet heritage in Ukrainian cities. So I dealt with these issues and cooperate and run projects focusing on this, and also I'm especially now focusing on participatory practices, which are really very important tool in sustainable development of the city. So I joined the Kharkiv School of Architecture in 2021, and maybe I tell just a few words about this institution. So this is the private institute. This is the first and the only private institute of higher education in architecture. So the university meets standard of university education in architecture, and the aim of this school is actually to give students very profound professional knowledge and up-to-date skills, and to train students and young generation of architects who can face all challenges, global and local challenges that our city faces. So, and in this institution, I work mostly as a manager, but I also don't leave my interest, and I run a course on heritage. And this year we started the course on heritage and management with students, and the topic of heritage in the post-war cities were not included in it, but now the situation is changing our curriculums. So, and even now we are. I am thinking about to add a few classes about this, and in the future to develop a few courses in this topic.
Yuri or Artem, I don't know which one wants to go next to tell us
Who is
more.
older? I think so. Yes, Artem. Yalla.
Okay. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you, Magda, thank you, Irina, for introducing me. And as you mentioned, I'm historian and a lecturer at the National Technical University and the University of Arts in Kharkiv. Both my university are state institutions, budget institutions, and I hold the position of docent. It is equivalent of associated professor maybe, and I teach courses in the history of Ukraine. This is a general course for non-historian students. And last 3 years, I have been a lecturer in Holocaust history at the Claims Conference University Partnership Program. And about 500 students took part in the courses about the history of the Holocaust during this time. And I'm also the co-founder and coordinator of academic project of the NGO, the Center for Interethnic Relations Research in Eastern Europe, whose activity is focused on different events, summer schools, conferences, seminars, exhibitions, and so on. And as a researcher, I'm a researcher of social history, and my thesis was devoted to the family as a social institute in Kharkiv region in 19th century. And I have been a researcher of Jewish history since 2015. And this year I'm going to complete a draft of a book about the Jewish population in the late Imperial Russia. And this book will become me a professor in Ukrainian system. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, my turn, I think so, yeah. Okay, thank you again for invitation. I must add that I also work with Artem for many years, since 2011 in our NGO, and we have done, I think so, some sort of successful projects. It's also dedicated, as was mentioned about before, different conferences, round tables, conferences dedicated some, I would say, problematical questions like cooperation in the Holocaust in Ukraine. And we did discussions not only, sorry, in Kharkiv, we also did it in Kiev, we also did it in Lviv, we also had an invitation to do it in Bahut, Ausland, no, not in Ukraine, somewhere. And like historian, for 14 years, I'm doing research on the Holocaust in Ukraine. And I was beginning on the topic persecution and extermination of Jewish population in Eastern Ukraine. I wrote some dozen of articles dedicated to participation of different groups, Melnikite groups, so-called Melnik group of OUN in the Holocaust in different regions of Ukraine and even in Balkans. And now my current project, it was not mentioned about before, I'm writing about Karaite Jewish-Muslim relations in Ukraine in time of Nazi occupation. And even before the war, I had success to accomplish a couple articles and even to do some archival research in Zaporizhia, in Kharkiv, and in Kiev, and even in Melitopol. And in Melitopol this year we organized conference, our traditional, I would say, conference, mosaic. How we call it, mosaic of Jews in mosaic of Ukrainian lands. Yes,
Jews in the ethnic mosaic of Ukraine.
Yes, okay, Jews in ethnic mosaic of Ukrainian lands, and so on. And within our NGO, I was doing before February 24th few projects. One of them dedicated to catalogization of literature in Yiddish and Hebrew in Korlenko Library. The second one I was supported, I was doing it independently, with helping to Yad Vashem and Holocaust Memorial Museum with searching of documents dedicated to history of Jewish population and the Holocaust in local states archive in Kharkiv. And also we had plans to establish the memorial tables in the place of the Holocaust and in place which was not memorialized in Kharkiv as well. Yeah, and another side of my activity, I was head of small conservative, I would say, conservative community in Kharkiv, and I'm doing rabbinical research in Mahon Shechter in Zoom, and all these projects were stopped by this war, unfortunately. Yep, that's it.
Thank you very much. I would like to follow up with the question about Kharkiv, the city that we want to talk about today. Kharkiv has been on the front line of the war from the very first night, and there is a massive humanitarian crisis. And yet you and your students continue to work. Would you please tell us how this war has impacted not only your personal, but also your professional life and the life and responsibilities of your professional institutions? And also, what about the impact on your institutions and other institutions of research and culture in Ukraine after February 24th?
So it's again my turn.
Up for you. I can begin if you want.
Please.
Okay, I will say it. I would say briefly. All of this project dedicated work in the library and in archive will stop on morning February 24th. All was closed. I called to a library and to archive, and nobody responded to me. And then understood that it's finished for this project for some time. Activity of Jewish community. I tried to help people a few days later with evacuation from Kharkiv because it's another part of culturological catastrophe in Ukraine. It's erasing of Jewish communities. It's physically, I would say, because people move to different countries, not only Jewish, of course, it's Christian, Muslim as well. And this is, from my perspective, it's a big, it's also tragedy. We're losing also not only material, but first of all people. But another part of life, and of course, like historian, like researcher, like person who works in archives and trying to analyze the stuff. I also stopped this work. I didn't do for 1 month nothing. I didn't open any documents. I didn't write any. I was asked for many times by Israeli, American, and maybe some European different newspapers and medias regarding the situation in Kharkiv. And just one time I was asked about some historical and political background in Kharkiv before the war. Always I was asked, especially from Israeli media, I was asked, "Ma kore b'Kharkiv?" That's the matzav b'Kharkiv. What situation in Kharkiv? That's it. So I became more, let's say, people who telling about what's going on. And I must underline from the beginning, I must to say that we all not staying in Kharkiv now. We moved from Kharkiv, somebody earlier, somebody later, and so on. So I'm located, for instance, in Chernivtsi, Artem in Lviv, if I can say, Irina as well. So we not represent now situation, fortunately, or it's not in Kharkiv. Yeah.
Okay. I try to present the situation with system of education now. And first of all, it's probably worth mentioning that Kharkiv is the largest center in terms of the number of universities and students in Ukraine, which was second only to Kyiv. There were about 11,000 students at the technical university, for example. And several thousand students from foreign country studied in Kharkiv, from India, from Morocco, Turkey, Nigeria, and other countries. And I know that at least one student from India was killed during the shelling of the city by the Russian army. And I know that five foreign students stay in Kharkiv right now. And it's dangerous, of course. But getting back to question, this is very short answer. Professional life, if you compare it even with the period of COVID crisis, has practically stopped. When shelling of civilian objects began on the third day of the war, it became obvious that the functioning of the university in a normal regime couldn't continue. However, it may be that the experience of the previous 2 years has helped the university to adapt even to this situation. And first, the university offered students 2 weeks of vacation. And during this time, a system of further work was developed. For example, during this time, a survey of teachers and students was conducted based on the results of which proposals were made. And we have adapted to the fact that most students now only have access to smartphones. The internet may not be stable, and for some students, access to the internet is not even possible every day. And for example, before the war, my university used the Office 365 platform, but now is a flexible solution was offered, and any platform that would be available to students, for example, Telegram chats and so on. And thus the educational process was restored. It's still difficult to say how many students will have the opportunity to join the process, but maybe in a couple of weeks it will be possible to draw the first conclusions. And one thing I can say for sure, students are interested in, they express a desire to return to their studies even in such circumstances. Of course, to perceive the war is very difficult for them. And in the early days of the war, some students continued to send me essays and asking me about the situation at the university. Other students wrote to me with the questions about when the war would end, expressed concern about their relatives in the other regions in Ukraine. And in those days, I felt that it was my duty to support them, and I answered them even at night. It was a problem situation, of course, but we will try to overcome this, and we try to hold the educational process.
You must remind that this always it was happened during the bombing, sheltering, and so on. This is the problems of internet. This is important to underline this stuff, the circumstances where this is happening, and this sometimes without light, without electricity. It depends on situation.
Irina, what about your institution and you?
Yeah. So the war influences and impact on our institutions, maybe even more because we are private institution and we are small institution. So if we start preparing to this, even not thinking about this, but preparing for this 2 weeks before war, we organize meetings for our students and teachers with representatives of National Guard, just to talk about it, what to do if it happened. We also had a workshop with psychologists just to prepare ourselves how to deal with extraordinary situation, and we also have a training in emergency medical care for students. And on Monday, on Friday, a week before the war start, we make a decision to go online and to let students go home, just in case, just to be more careful. And it was actually right decision. So, and when the war started, our students, because not all, but a lot of our students are from other cities. They were with their families, so we shouldn't, we hadn't take care about their evacuation. But anyway, 2 weeks were really very hard because students with their families and the teachers tried to fled from Kharkiv and other towns and find just relatively safe places. And in 2 weeks, we just try to come down a bit and just to think about our future. And we just made a very strong decision that the institution, our teachers and the school doesn't leave Ukraine, because we have a lot of offering, and we are very grateful for all the foreign institutions who offer us scholarships and other opportunities to spend time in other countries. But we really believe that now is the hardest time for Ukraine, and Ukraine need to get together all intellectuals, forces, and people here. And what we can do in this very complicated situation, we can teach, we can give knowledge to young generation of architects, to give the knowledge which are really very important and will be very important in very close future for rebuilding our city. So we make a decision to relocate the school in Lviv. For the time being, we restart our classes online, partly offline, because some of our students are already here. So, and now we are looking for premises and try to locate our school here and bring our teachers and students to Lviv to continue our education. And we also will announce our university year admission in Lviv this year. We also work on changing of our syllabus and curriculum to adjust our educational projects to new needs of our society. And as a school of architecture, we also try to be the place and the platform for dialogues between different experts on the issue of reconstructing Ukrainian post-war Ukrainian city. And we already launched the project which will deal with crisis architecture. So, and Kharkiv will be the main case. Because Kharkiv, it's not the question of rebuilding, it's the question of rethinking. Mm-hmm. And it's the question of the context which changing radically and rapidly. It's a question of new urban strategy. It's a question of new economy. And it's very, very important to develop approaches, methodology, to discuss deeper these questions. And we launched the projects which will develop some kind of milestones and develop some roadmaps and methodology for Ukrainian post-war cities. And now we are open for cooperation, and we get together experts from Ukraine and abroad to launch this project. And we are very happy and grateful that a lot of institutions support us. We have really great intellectual support from architecture school all over Europe and United States. So we got support from the SCOSA, the Association of dean of architecture school in Great Britain. So they offer us their courses, and also they offer us to fill our gaps in our program, because now some of our teachers can teach even online because they don't have access to internet. So we really feel very big support from our colleague abroad, and also we feel support from our colleague in Lviv. The Academy of Art, they offer us, they help us and offer us their premises, and they just it's not just empty premises, they just give us them and put their conference hall in other side and said, okay, we will think what we will do, well, we will have a big gathering, we will think, so, and we will give you these premises. It's really very very nice, and we are very, very grateful for this support.
Thank you.
Irina,
yeah, go ahead. No, go
excuse me, Magda, I just would like to follow up on this, because Irina, you mentioned the future reconstruction of Kharkiv after the war, and may I ask you what are the risks for the urban fabric in this context you see from the perspective of your expertise, and how such decisions are to be made, and by whom in the future, or actually right now?
Okay, maybe I will mention a few very important things which I think that they are important, and maybe, so for me they are very important and at the same time very challenging for Ukrainian society. So first very important issue is engagement of local community into this reconstruction process. So it's very important to make them as a very important actors in this discussion and process. So the local authority, the researchers should be aware of it. The researchers should provide them with any support, any knowledge through workshops, through conferences, to give them the voice in this city making decisions. What challenges I see with this, that we still are quite paternalistic society, and we still have the local authority which are used to be the main actor in this scene of urban development and make decisions and just tell everyone what should be done. And another thing that local community are also quite paternalistic and just want local authority to do most things instead of them. But what I observe now in Kharkiv, that how the local community is organized, mobilized, how they help each other, how they organize support, and how they fight for their city. So, and I do believe that this local community changed very much, and they will really very important and strong actor in this discussion and this process of reconstruction. Another very important things is respect to local tradition. So we have an example for last 20-30 years. We have the example in post-war cities that they almost clean up the old urban fabric and replaced it with new landscape. So, and it's happened with in Beirut with Lebanon, yeah, when after the civil war, when about 80% of urban fabric were destroyed, so, and they just reshaped and made a new center. So it's very important to keep memory about the pre-war time. This is the respect to tradition, to values, and it's also challenging for Kharkiv because Kharkiv has a very complex history, but very rich history. It has imperial background and also Soviet background, and it's also part of the identity of the city. So, and this memory should be memorized, should exist in the city. Another very important thing is memory of war. The city should remember the war, and it's very, very important how we deal with this, how to remember it. Should we, and there are different examples we can discuss very deeply to make our own decision and to avoid the mistakes which other countries did. For good example, for example, Berlin Wall, so which were not destroyed, and it turned in an artistic object, but also a symbol, a strong symbol of the war. It's the ruin of hall in Hiroshima. Yeah, it's also turned in the memory place. But we also have other examples when cities, destroyed cities, were rebuilt, totally rebuilt, and erased the memory of the war. This is Warsaw. So it erased a memory and made this place quite artificial. It's also another example of Wrocław that applied for very exclusive approaches to rebuilding. The Polish authority and architects, they just rebuild the so-called Polish heritage, which refer to Polish history, and neglect just German heritage, trying to turn this Bratslav in Wrocław. So we should research it. There are a lot of research about it, but we should discard this example to avoid these mistakes. And actually, it's my worry here that we are already used to rebuild. We have this tradition to rebuild, and I think that it should be really a very big discussion what to rebuild and for whom and in what purpose. So it's very, very important things.
Yeah, and Kharkiv is a complex town. And Artem, you called it the imperial outpost, right? So it has these connections with the Empire of Russia. So rebuilding it and reimagining it, and that relation that Russia is the aggressor now is going to be quite difficult on how. So I wonder, Yuri and Artem, you've been also working on these questions of interethnic relations and heritage. So I wonder whether you could also reflect on some of the questions that Irina and solutions that Irina has mentioned.
Yeah, I'll try maybe to add something. First of all, it's must be mentioned that it's possible to rebuild almost everything. It gives, for instance, example of Warsaw. We know that Warsaw was destroyed totally during the war, Second World War, and all the structures, if we travel and go into city center, this is all old city, so-called, and so on, it's everything reconstruction, 100% it's reconstruction. It's very, I would say, contrasted with Krakow, with Lviv, and so on. Another situation is population. Because we know this war, it makes change of population sometimes for very, I would say, radical. For instance, situation in Lviv, right. Because 1945 population of Lviv, 1950s, 1960s, it's a totally different people who lived before the war, totally different people. No Jews, no Poles. Ukrainians who lived before, it could be 5-10% probably, I'm not sure, and so on. So for me, it sounds terrible. It sounds maybe not correct now to say, but for me it's interesting to observe how population in different Ukrainian cities move into different places and so on. For me, it's a question also what population will come back to Kharkiv after the war, and how many people. Because when I was in this evacuational bus with Jews or descendants of Jews or people who has Jewish relatives or who suppose that they are going to be Jews and so on, it's quite interesting in that situation. I'm sure that these people will not come back to Kharkiv. Will not come back to Kharkiv. For these people who moved, mostly women and children who moved to Poland, to Germany, France, and somebody I know moving forwards in US and Canada as well. I know such stories. It's a question who will come back to Kharkiv, because I want to come back to Kharkiv. To be honest, I don't know how and when and so on. I want to do it. And this war will change, I think, demographical situation and so on, and from culturological perspective and so on. It's not, I talked a little bit about situation with Jewish population. I think it will be also with, Artem mentioned about this status of Kharkiv like student city. Yes, student city. Because I remember during the first days of the war, a lot of foreign students escaped from Kharkiv. I know a lot of even before the war, I know a lot of it's interesting statistic. I think it's a lot of Israeli Arabs moved from Kharkiv on the eve of the war, because Israeli government gave option to do it to Israeli citizens. And most part of these people who moved to Israel were Arabs from Galilee, from maybe some central part of Israel and so on. I know some people who did it. For me, it's a question: did they believe that war will be and will be in such scale? Because for instance, I didn't believe that. I would say believe that it will be war, but it not will be such terrible situation like we can see now. So I'm not prophet. I am not God. I don't know what will be, but I'm sure that this war will change demographical situation and so on in our city. I'm sure, unfortunately.
But also the process of reconstruction and the proper policy with this participatory approach can also shape and make stronger the community which come back, and also will be attractive for people to come to back to their city, because people in Kharkiv has really strong city identity and they like their city, and I think that if the policy will be proper, correct and and people will see that there is the place where they are, that they are needed, so they will come.
Artem?
Unfortunately, we have such experience, and I mean the local war on Donbass. And during this war, many citizens of small town moved to Donetsk or Kharkiv, for example. And I think we will have such situation, and many citizens from destroyed small towns as Chuguyev or Izum or Akhtirka move to Kharkiv in the future. And I agree with Irina and Yuri, we will need a certain plan about rethinking and rebuilding our city.
There is a question. Actually, I'm sort of monitoring the questions that come from the public. We have a set of questions we wanted to discuss, but I think there's one that follows up nicely on the discussion that we were just having. How can one appropriately memorialize a population that has become absent without insensitivity or whitewashing if the choices depend on the population that returns? Right. This is sort of speaking to what Yuri was saying, that it's not just the spaces, but it also the people who there will be, the cities will be different cities because different people will return. So how can we memorialize the experience of the past when that population is now a different population?
A lot of to commemorate. I think so. We will not invent something new. Probably we will. Let's see. But I would live on all places where maybe some, let's say, places where were destroyed it or a lot of people were killed. I would leave maybe some also information, short information, maybe with this popular application. Now we can put it and to find out more information on the internet about this. Probably this way we can commemorate, commemorate and all this the tragical past. Probably. No, first of all, I think first step is to rebuild city. I think it's to rebuild city, and after to do this commemoration and so on. And because I remember after beginning of war in 2014, first wave of city commemoration dedicated to activity has happened in Kharkiv in March and April 2014. It was battles between I would say radical Ukrainian nationalist groups represented by Patriot of Ukraine, Patriot Ukraine. It became later core of battalion and after the detachment of Azov, and Russian nationalists who radical nationalists. And it was happened one battle on the street Rymarska, where is Prosvita was located. Prosvita, it's who doesn't know, to people from US, it's like Ukrainian nationalist center for enlightenment, education, and so on, or affiliated in Ukraine with right parties, I would say, conservative and right parties. It was battle between Russian nationalists, pro-Russian groups, and Ukrainian nationalists, pro-Russian groups. And Kernes, he was head of city major, he was between them. And interesting what tables was information on this place battle. Because for first weeks it was pro-Russian table, I don't remember what's written there. And after, when on April, May, it was understandable that Kharkiv it will be Ukrainian city. This information was changed, and it was written that Kharkiv is showed that it's Ukrainian, it's Ukrainian city. And after, I remember it was when the war was continuing in Donbass in 2014-15, in Kharkiv appeared, not only in Kharkiv, of course, especially in other cities, appeared a lot of information and all that, like tables about people who died, actually, who fallen in these battles in the Ukrainian side. And it also, I think, it's a way to commemorate maybe such people. And also the victims of civilian victims of bombardment. I think it's very, very important to commemorate them because first of all, it's civilian victims, and we have, for instance, situation with Chechenian war, where is any monument erected on the territory of Chechnya or Russian Federation dedicated to even civilian victims of this war who were killed during bombardment, during so-called zachistka, cleansing, and so on by Russian army. As I remember, there is only one monument to victims, civilian victims of this people erected somewhere in Western Europe. As I know, I would first of all commemorate people civilians who were killed during this barbaric killings.
Irina, what about your thoughts?
So I think that we should have a very sensitive approach to this. So unfortunately, we have this tradition. It's not good or bad, but we have this tradition to put monuments which not provoke any touch and really emotional feelings. Yeah, it's the place where authority just put flowers once per year for some commemoration day. So it could be a way, but I would like to see more sensitive approaches using the artists, using writers, some creative approaches which just provoke really emotion, and to commemorate the place where you can feel this this story, this history. It's one way of commemoration, very sensitive and very modest, I would say. It could be, you know, some outlines of some places. Yeah, it's like an example. It's also educational programs. You know, it's also the way of commemorate. You know, and it's also research, deep research, and I know that already historians and sociologists do their research collecting interviews. It's also the way to collect materials and then to think how to commemorate this war based on such sources. So there are very different ways, but for me it's very important to be very careful with this approaches.
Yes, I agree. I support different ways, not let's say conservative or traditional
Yeah,
way.
yeah,
But,
you just
remember,
mentioned,
but
yeah.
by different ways.
Sure, sure.
Sure.
Iran, you want to ask the next question?
Yes, thank you. So what you just what we have been talking about made clear that there is lots of rethinking to be done right now and in the next time, rethinking regarding the places, the space, rethinking regarding people, the past, the memories. But I think maybe there is one more component regarding the cooperations. And cooperations in context of academia brings us to the question of what impact this war had on scholarship in Ukraine in general, both in short term and both regarding short term and long term ramifications. And for instance, Ukrainian Academy has had connections with Russian scholarly institutions, and so did your center, Yuri, and ATEM, for instance. Could you please reflect on these past connections and the future of these relations, both formal and informal, between scholars and colleagues?
Okay, I will begin probably about this network, scholars. Look, it's one of the main purpose, I would say, for our activity for these 11 years, almost 11 years. It was to build on such network, and I think it was quite successful from our perspective. What we trying to do, we trying to do it as well, and we had some. I think we had some success to build such a network with people from Lviv, first of all, probably from Rivne, from Kryvyi Rih, from Kyiv, maybe from Odessa as well. So it gave us optional to, first of all, I think it's also conferences, activity on the conference, it's also summer schools. But the question is how we will use this network now in this situation, because to be honest, last month we are I speaking about for myself. I was in shock, to be honest, all time. I always didn't talk to people. I communicate with Artem. I communicate with people from our circle and so on. And but it was not enough time for this. And I think it's too early to ask about this time. What I think. how this network will help or not will help us to this, because this time we had to find maybe some another connections, for instance, to support people, to find maybe some people who can volunteer, who can help by food, by evacuation, and so on. But I must underline that one member of our center, who is located now in Bucharest. Yes, Artem, where is he located? Yeah.
Yes.
In Bucharest. Alexey Chebotaryov, he does a lot like a volunteer, like a person who try to support anybody in Ukraine and who moving abroad. So I would say this network, it helps even now in this situation, but it doesn't care about scientific research, unfortunately, no, because it's not, there is no time for this. But I had the idea, because before the war, my article was one article about activity of Karaites in Kyiv during Nazi occupation was accepted in one journal. I had even the idea to call people who is responsible for this publishing of this issue and to ask him. Okay, I told him that how is going? We are going to do something with the journal, not to do this journal, because he also located in Ukraine. But it's another story.
Okay, for me, I don't know, all these questions are very complicated at that time when war in its hot phase. And I understand that war has consequences for the Ukrainian academy, as well as it affects all citizens. We have researchers and teachers who have gone to the front and risk their lives every minute. And of course, all those who remain in the war zone for various reasons don't want to leave their cities are also at risk. Again, we are talking about the largest scientific centers as Kharkiv or Kyiv, but also about Chernihiv and Kherson, an occupied city. And unfortunately, I know from my colleague, from my friends, about public murders of civilians in Kherson, about rape of women in this city. And of course, short-term prospects are in fact frozen scientific life. In this situation, it's easy to be a lecturer, but impossible to study something, to write something. The long-term consequences could also be devastating, but this is the first time when I'm seeing such powerful help from academy from different states, from USA, from Germany, from Poland, from Romania, a huge number of proposals for Ukrainian researchers. Again, due to various circumstances, many Ukrainian researchers cannot use this window of opportunity. But I hope that after the war, these possibilities will remain for some time, which will help Ukrainian science. Financial assistance to the education system as a whole will also be needed because many universities have been seriously destroyed by the war. For example, one of the oldest university in Ukraine, Kharkiv University, named Karazina.
So if I can add some unpleasant remarks. I think that the war shows us a huge crisis of academia and the educational system in Ukraine. So we are affiliated with the Ministry of Education, and so the ministry is totally mixed up, and they just give orders, so there are no any dialogue. They don't know what to do, and we also don't know what to do. But if we are together, we just sit and talk and decide. And the same with academia and also with cultural institutions and all movements I see now. It's just a local the people from different spheres mobilized by themselves and not by support, with support of their institutions, state institutions, but without their support. And actually, this is a big issue. What to do with the system, and maybe the system finally should be changed, and also should be big discussion how to reshape our academia and our educational system after the war.
I certainly hope that, and I mentioned it earlier, that for us here, certainly in the United States, the war has really exposed us to your scholarship, to your work, which we haven't been seeing, and for Fordham, certainly, I'm really excited about continuing some of those relations with the institutes that I've become more familiar with due to this Irina's introduction, and so we hope that the brain drain will not hurt your thing, and in fact that these relations can strengthen both sides of the academic world, both in the West and in Ukraine. And I just want to, as we're wrapping up, because the time is running out, I just wanted to say that I'm happy to say that the New York Public Library has joined the American Academy for Jewish Research and Fordham's effort to create fellowships for Ukrainian scholars, and we hope we'll be able to continue it, not just the next few months, that will allow for this kind of professional networking and resources, remote resources to various research materials that may not be either at all available for Ukrainian scholars because there may be paywalls and all kinds of things that the university may not have had access to, or short-term because your institutions are currently unable to support your work. And I understand, as Yuri and Artem said, you can't be thinking of research, but this is not just a sort of a short resource that we may be able to continue these kinds of shared partnerships. So there's so much more. We had many more questions, and we have a lot of questions in the Q&A, which I will forward to the participants. But the time is running out, and I'm afraid we have to finish. So I want to thank Artem, Yuri, and Irina Klemenko as well for joining us and for making this possible, and for sharing your thoughts about the current war and ideas about the future. And it's very nice to hear in these dark times thoughts and conversations about the future. So thank you so much. I hope all of you will join us for our next event in this series on Friday, April the 1st at 9 a.m. in the morning in American time, 3 p.m. in Germany, and 4 p.m. in Ukraine. And we will be sure to share information with you later on. So thank you, all of you, for joining us. And I look forward to collaborating with you and learning more about your work. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Have a good day. Yeah. Peaceful day. Shalom.
Yes.